going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about my latest camera pickup, which is the Sony A7C. We're going to talk about why I purchased this camera over something like the A7S III or waiting for something like the A7IV to come out. And we're going to talk about why I prefer to use something like this over my A7 III, which is a camera that I'm currently shooting on, and my overall experience using the camera. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. So you might have noticed that I'm actually not in my usual setting. Behind me is a park, back there is my car, and the reason for that is because I'm currently in Florida. I have a whole bunch of videos explaining what it is that I'm doing in Florida in the works, but before I release them, I wanted to drop something that was specifically camera related or specifically photography and videography related, because I actually haven't released anything like that in a little while, and the last videos I dropped were all car related. And don't get me wrong, that's a lot of content that I do and behind the scenes and stuff like that, but I wanted to talk about some technical stuff and some of the equipment that I've been using, because I actually did plan to do a video about this camera a little while ago, but things just kind of got away from me with this whole trip and while I'm down in Florida. So we're going to talk about why I bought this camera and some of my experiences using it in the past, I want to say 3 or 4 weeks that I've actually owned it. My main reason for buying this camera was I really like the articulating screen on it. Now, it really doesn't seem like much, and I even had people question, like, are you really going to buy a whole nother camera just because it has the articulating screen? And my answer to them is yes, I 100% am going to buy a camera solely because it has the articulating screen, because aside from vlogging, there's actually a whole bunch of uses for this camera that I really have just kind of discovered over the past few weeks using it. So on setups like the current one that I have for my A7 III right now, usually because the A7 III or even my Blackmagic camera both don't have articulating screens, I always have to use a monitor to frame up my shot and make sure I have enough headroom and like just to make sure that everything is in frame properly. And it's really annoying. I hate having to go out, I hate having to have this extra piece of equipment with me all the time, and I hate the fact that it needs an extra battery, so it makes it extra heavy. It's very top heavy, so like even if I'm holding the camera like this, it still like wants to tilt up, and then like it's so far away, but it's really annoying. I hate having to bring extra gear with me in order just to film a video. So I decided to pick up the A7C because after watching a whole bunch of videos, I was like, you know what, I have to have it. It'll be really useful for when I'm out filming. So some of the things that I like to use it for, some of the problems that it fixes for me, like I already mentioned, is I no longer have to bring a monitor with me when I'm out filming. And it's such a huge relief, and I've been so spoiled because I've had this camera for about 3 or 4 weeks now. I've been so spoiled with it that I was really dreading having to use the current setup that I have. And you know, it's such a crazy thing to think about, because before I had this camera, I would just be like, okay, cool, let me just bring the monitor with me and frame it out. Or like, I had a Sony A6300, which I actually did sell to purchase this camera. And although I had a wide angle lens for it, the lens wasn't native, so the focus was half of the time off, and still I wasn't able to see what I was framing. So this articulating screen definitely solved a lot of those problems. So when I'm vlogging, I can frame myself. If I'm filming something at home, it'll definitely be much easier to frame myself. And one thing that has kind of bugged me for a while now that they haven't mentioned, and I don't think I mentioned it when I purchased my DJI RS2. If you haven't seen that video, I have a full video talking about my film rig setup for 2021. But one of the things that they don't mention about all the new gimbals and the new design on the gimbals is if you ever look really close at them, they design them so that way when you have your camera set up, and I actually don't have my gimbal with me here to show you this, but when you have your camera held up on the pistol grip gimbals, you can see directly behind, because what they do is they lower the motor so that way you have perfect view of your camera. My issue with that is I do a lot of automotive videography, and when I invert my gimbal and I try and go for those really low angles on cameras such as my Sony A7 III and my Blackmagic pocket cinema camera, when the camera is that low, I cannot see what I'm doing because the motor is in the way for me actually seeing the screen. So although it's useful for filming upright, it's really a huge pain when I'm trying to invert the gimbal and get low angle shots like that. But this camera fixes that. Being able to just take it out, go like this, and rotate it, and go really, really low is really just amazing because, you know, the Sony A7 III, while it has the screen that lifts up, literally all it does is just it just ends up hitting the back of the motor on the gimbal. It's even really annoying when I'm doing rolling shots sitting out somebody's car, like if I'm not using the rig or something like that. If I'm trying to get rolling shots and I can't see what it is that I'm doing, I almost always end up having to use this monitor that I have currently mounted to the camera. And then it's like, all right, where am I gonna put the monitor? But I also need both hands because my camera's hanging out the window. So it's like I have to suction cup the monitor, then I have to make sure the cable doesn't get tangled. And I actually did manage to get some rolling shots with this setup on my gimbal, and I had no problem. I was able to see in almost every single position that I put the gimbal, and overall it was just really helpful having that screen. I mentioned that I was going to tell you guys my overall experience with the camera, seeing as I've had it for a few weeks, and pretty much everything I just told you kind of sums it up. Like, I've been using and abusing the articulating screen. Some of the things I like to do, which really you shouldn't be doing, but I do like to get rolling shots while I'm driving sometimes, and you know, it's very unsafe to do something like that. But one of the things I really do appreciate about the camera is now, instead of having to like turn my head or like quickly glance to make sure I have everything in frame, or you know, make sure the shot is going, literally all I do is, since my steering wheel is on the right side, I literally just put it like this while I'm driving. I can see everything at a glance and then just fire away and just glance over, glance over, glance over. So it's really not something I should be doing, but it is very helpful, and it makes me drive much safer if I'm trying to capture rolling shots by myself. So disclaimer, don't ever do that. I'm just reckless like that. But that's another thing that this camera is pretty helpful for. The reason I picked up this camera as opposed to something like the A7S III or waiting for the A7IV to drop is because, one, I needed something now, and two, I didn't feel like spending so much money on a camera that I essentially am going to be beating around and literally throwing in my bag and practically bringing everywhere with me. Now, don't get me wrong, this is still a $2,000 camera, so for some people that's not exactly affordable. But for what I wanted to use it for, I think it's pretty decent for the price range. Like, I wouldn't be so worried. If I dropped this camera on the floor, I wouldn't be as worried as, let's say, I had an A7S III and I wound up dropping that on the floor. I would be much more upset because that camera is practically double the price. And you know, the goal of this was to be the beat around camera. Do I still use it for events? Absolutely. Is it still a workhorse, and am I still going to use it for all of my professional projects? 100%. But I wanted something that I wouldn't be so upset about just having it with me all the time. If I drop it, if it's in my bag, if it gets wet. So this is now currently my main camera, the A7 III. Although I love it, I mainly only use it for photography, or let's say I need a second camera for B-roll or something like that. It's really good to have the A7 III for stuff like that. Before I picked up this camera, my A7 III was my main camera, and my backup camera was my Sony A6300. I'm still running two camera bodies, so let's say I need to do something multi-camera, I still have two cameras. But I definitely wanted to get this camera, so I was like, you know what, let me get rid of the 6300, let me purchase this, and then I'll still have these two cameras. I won't have a whole bunch of equipment that I don't need. Now, the kit lens that you see on here is not the lens that I use. I primarily use the lens that I'm filming on right now, which is the Sony 16-35mm f4. I plan on doing a video about this lens, possibly, but I picked it up recently purposely because I had this camera, and the lens that it comes with, although it's really compact and cool, it's a 28mm and it's really close. I used it in videos like my H-Day vlog and really just filming like throughout the whole trip coming down here to Florida. But if you guys want to see more of that content, you're gonna have to make sure that you're subscribed. But that's why I purchased this camera. I wanted something now that was not so expensive, that I could beat around and have with me all the time. Some of the technical aspects that I really won't get too much into, but this camera does shoot 4K. It has all the same video settings as my A7 III, so it does 4K 30, 4K 24, 1080 with shutter speeds up to 120, and it does S-Log and cine profiles and all that fun stuff. So it does a lot of the stuff that all my previous Sony cameras do, which is really good, especially if I'm doing a multi-camera shooting. The recording feature, I'm pretty sure it has no limit on it. The color science, for the most part, is gonna look the same. My lenses are interchangeable between it, so like if I'm not using the 16-35 on it to vlog, or I don't have the kit lens on because I just wanted something compact, I can also put my 24-70 G Master. I have adapters to use my Canon 24-105 lens on it, so it's pretty useful having another Sony. And in comparison to my 6300, it's so clutch to use for vlogging. In comparison to my A7 III, it's so clutch for vlogging. It's a full frame camera, so I get the full utilization of all my full frame lenses. My plans for this camera are to run it to the ground, whether it's for client work or personal work. I really just bought this camera to use and abuse it, and I do have to say, since I bought it, I really have been using and abusing it. The size difference, I feel like a lot of people say that the size is so much different. If I put the two together, really the only difference between them is the little arch for the viewfinder that's up here is just not there, and it's over here, which, you know, it makes it a little bit more compact, but nothing too crazy. I feel like the grips are still equally as big, and if I'm running my 24-70 G Master, I have a massive lens on here anyway, so it's not too different of a size. One of the main things that somebody was telling me that might possibly bother them was that there's no custom buttons on the camera. Now, my A7 III has 4 of them. I use every single one of them for different features. One of them I barely use. The other main one that I use, I was able to set it up over here. The trash can I have here on both my cameras is set up for my white balance. And the good thing about Sony is I can literally change any of these buttons in the back to do whatever it is that I want. So that's exactly what I did. If I need to adjust the white balance, I have a button for it. If I need to change my shooting mode, I have a button for it. And the little function menu settings, like all of my settings, I managed to find a spot for them, and you know, it's a little bit different. It might not be the most ideal, and it does kind of feel like they're all squeezed in there, but full functionality for what I need this camera to do, I was able to customize and actually make it happen. So shout out to Sony for having really cool customizable function menu settings. And also, I have to say, this video is not sponsored by Sony. I probably should have said that in the beginning, but this video is not sponsored by Sony. I went to the store, I bought this camera. I wish this video was sponsored by Sony, because honestly, I would love to get a free camera, or I would love to experience the use of one of their cameras without having to spend so much money on it or renting it or something like that. But the video is not sponsored by Sony. I'm just a really huge Sony fan. They cover most of the needs that I need for photography and videography, and this camera is 100% the embodiment of that. My A7 III was very close to being perfect. Now, between using my A7 III and my A7C, I think I have everything I need camera-wise, and I probably won't be purchasing any new cameras anytime soon. Yeah, okay, that's a joke, ignore that. I probably will end up purchasing new cameras soon, but for the time being, the A7C is gonna be my everyday use camera. I'm gonna use it for every single shoot that I do, unless I have a reason to only be using the Blackmagic camera, but this camera is gonna be with me. A7 III, I probably won't be using as much unless it's for photography, and also for traveling. I'm probably gonna do a separate video, because traveling with all my gear has been a huge pain in the ass, and I really wish I didn't bring so much stuff with me, especially because that tiny car right there is what I've been trying to squeeze all my stuff into. So it hasn't been fun. If you want to see that video, let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, share, comment, obviously, and hit the subscribe button, because it actually does help, and it really does mean a lot to me. And one thing I noticed that I haven't been saying in my previous videos, hit the bell notification. If you want to get notified every time I post a new video, hit the bell notification, and YouTube will just automatically let you know, and then you can just open your app or email or whatever and just come check out my latest videos. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think about the A7C, and if you agree with me on purchasing this over something like the A7S III or waiting for the A7IV. And yeah, take care. I'll see you in the next one. I have a bug on my lens right now, and as long as he doesn't get in my frame, I'll be okay.